Hi everyone. I wanted to review the DSM-5 criteria the way that I generally teach it in the classroom. I did upload a video that might be helpful for you as well, but in this video I'm going to go over the 11 DSM-5 criteria as well as look at the homework assignment that you have for this week. So the DSM-5 was published in 2013, and I'm going to pull up the criteria. So in order for somebody to be diagnosed with a substance use disorder, one would have to meet at least 2 out of the 11 criteria. So these criteria, again, come directly from the DSM-5, which is the manual for diagnosing mental disorders, including substance use disorders. So a couple of important points before we go over the criteria are that in order to be qualified to use the DSM-5 and diagnose somebody with a substance use disorder, you have to have at least a case Act, which stands for Credentialed Alcohol and Substance Use Counselor in Training. And you can get that credential by to North Country Community College and majoring in the chemical dependency counseling program that some of you are currently in, which provides you with the 350 clock hours that you need to apply for this credential. The other way is to obtain a master's degree in either social work or mental health counseling, or a doctor's degree in psychology, or become a medical doctor. So with a case Act with a 2-year degree, you can only use the DSM-5 to diagnose people with substance use disorders. You would need one of the other credentials and degrees to be able to use the DSM-5 to diagnose somebody with other disorders, like major depression, for example. So the other important piece is that there's something that I call the power of the pen, and this is a known term that you actually have a discussion post to do on as well. And it basically means that sometimes when people have certain credentials behind their names, they are qualified to use the DSM-5. Sometimes people may overuse it or may plug in a criteria for somebody without having as much information as they need to have to make that person eligible for that particular diagnosis. And this is a problem because diagnoses are labels. They can affect people's lives in many different ways. So I personally think that it's very important to make sure that you have enough evidence and information from the individual that you're working with before you slap on a diagnosis. So as you're going through your homework assignment, I think that it's really important to sometimes, I guess, underdiagnose before you overdiagnose. So in order to have a substance use disorder, somebody has to have at least 2 of the 11 criteria. And if you look at the specifiers, you can see that a mild substance use disorder has 2 to 3 symptoms, moderate would be 4 to 5, and a severe substance use disorder is 6 or more symptoms. So if somebody diagnoses somebody, an individual with a severe alcohol use disorder, for example, then they can't ever go back to moderate or mild. So once it's severe, it's severe. And these are diagnoses and labels that may stay with a person for the rest of their life, and it may affect their ability to get certain jobs, among other things. But if you have enough information to diagnose somebody with a moderate substance use diagnosis, then you can always work with them. And as you gather more information, if you find that they may meet more criteria, then you can always change a mild substance use disorder to a moderate or a moderate to severe. So basically, you just can't go backwards. So I always think it's important to be very cautious. These are people's lives, that you're dealing with, and the importance of diagnoses are really to help people get the level of care that they need. So we will go through this, And I'm going to give you an example. So in the DSM-5, there are diagnoses and codes for every substance. So it's the same criteria, same 11 criteria, but you're actually going to specify the drug. So you're not going to write substance use disorder mild. Instead, if the person is using the substance alcohol, you would write alcohol use disorder, comma, mild. Okay, and this is how you're going to do your homework. So there's also codes associated with that. So for example, alcohol use disorder mild, the code would be 305.00. For the purpose of this class, I'm not going to require you to know that because you didn't have to get the DSM-5 as one of your textbooks. So rather, instead of the code, you will specify the substance or substances, you just won't use the code that's associated with it. So as I'm going through this, I will give you the example of alcohol. So in the DSM-5, it would be explained as alcohol use disorder, and it's defined as a problematic pattern of substance use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress as manifested by at least 2 of the following occurring with a 12-month period. So there's 2 important things to think about in this definition. One is that you have to have at least 2 of the 11 criteria to have a use disorder. If somebody just met 1 criteria, they would not qualify as having a substance use disorder. The other important piece is that it has to happen in a 12-month period. So if somebody got a DWI 5 years ago, you could not use that in order to meet a criteria. Okay. So number 1, again, I'm using the example of alcohol. Alcohol is often taken in larger amounts or over a longer period than was intended. So the example would be in larger amounts. So if somebody intended, that's the key word, to only drink 2 beers, but they ended up having 6, so they only intended to have 2, but they had more than they intended because they had 6, then they would meet criteria number 1. Or another example in the same criteria would be if somebody planned on going to the bar after work just to have a drink and maybe stay an hour, but it's 6 hours later and it's closing time, then they stayed much longer than they had intended. So it has to be intention. Number 2, there's a persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control use. So if somebody says, oh, I really want to quit drinking, I'm really going to stop. After tonight, I'm going to stop. Or they actually do stop. Maybe they cut down or they completely stop for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, but then it's been unsuccessful and they relapse, then they would meet criteria number 2. Now, I am simplifying these for you, that obviously things are a little bit much more complex in reality. So these are just examples to help you understand what these criteria mean. Number 3, a great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain the substance, so to get it. So if somebody is asking all their friends to get them alcohol and they're spending hours on the phone and they're driving hours to get the substance, that would be one example. Or if they're using it for an extended period of time on a regular basis, hours and hours and hours, or they're using throughout the day, or recovering from its effects. If it takes them a day or 2 to recover after a night of going out and they're laying on the couch, that would be an example of criteria number 3. Criteria number 4 is new to the DSM-5, so it's craving. And this one, I find that it's difficult when looking at case studies to give this particular criteria, unless it's very laid out and stated that that person is craving that substance. So if you have a person in front of you, you can ask them if they ever crave the substance, if they ever can't wait to get home from work, for example, to use. or use a craving scale that sometimes is often used as a screening tool. It's easy to do this when you have that person in front of you. But if you are reading a case study, like you will for a homework assignment, unless it is stated directly in that, you cannot use craving. We cannot assume that somebody craves a substance. 5, recurrent use resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home. Keyword here is recurrent, so it has to happen more than once, so at least 2 times in a 12-month period. So if somebody calls into sick one time in a year because they're hungover and they don't go to work, that doesn't, they don't meet that criteria. If they do it 2 times, they meet the criteria because it's recurrent. Okay, so that's work, or if they don't go to school, or if they don't complete their assignments, or if they don't complete their role obligations at home. 6, continued use despite having persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by the effects of alcohol. So every time the individual drinks, they get into a fight with their significant other. Again, it has to be recurrent, and the person continues to drink even though every time they drink, they get into a fight with their significant other. Number 7, important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced due to use. So you used to go and play golf every Sunday with your buddies, but they don't drink when they play golf, and you'd rather drink, so you stay home to drink rather than go and do your extracurricular activity, golfing. Backing up for a minute, you also cannot or should not double dip. So this says important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced. So number 7 and number 6 may be very similar in nature, that sometimes things are interrelated. So for example, lives and interpersonal problems. If you're using a fight with your significant other in number 6, you can't also use that for number 7 if there are arguments or social activities that are given up or reduced, because again, one criteria can change a person's diagnosis to a more severe diagnosis. 8, recurrent use in situations in which it's physically hazardous. Again, the key word is recurrent, has to happen more than once. So somebody gets into a vehicle after drinking more than once, 12-month period, or if they get into, so if they drive, or if they get into a vehicle with other people that are under the influence because they are impaired and are making, having poor judgment, going to work under the influence and using machinery, for example, or chainsaws to cut down firewood. Are examples. Again, it has to be recurrent more than once. Number 9, substance uses continue despite knowledge of having persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problems that is likely to have been caused or exacerbated by the substance. Every time you drink, you wake up with a stomach ache. You know that it's probably because of the amount of alcohol that you've consumed, but you still continue to drink. Every time you drink, you wake up with more anxiety, or it affects your anxiety, exacerbates it, but you continue to drink anyway. That is an example. Number 10, tolerance. Tolerance is defined as needing more of the substance to get the same effect, or by using the same amount of substance that you were using and getting a diminished effect. So it used to take you 6 beers, it only took you 6 beers to get a buzz or to get a good buzz, and now you have to drink a 12-pack. That's an example of tolerance. And then withdrawal are symptoms that you get that are classic in regards to that particular substance if you stop using. So the example would be, every time you, or if you stop drinking, I'm sorry, you may get like shakes or DTs, seizures, nausea, vomiting, headaches, insomnia, hypersomnia. Those are just some examples. So again, the person has to meet at least 2 of the criteria. So if they met 2 criteria and the substance was alcohol, then you would write it as alcohol use disorder, comma, mild. There are also other specifiers, including an early remission and sustained remission in a controlled environment. So in early remission, that means that that person has not met any criteria for at least 3 months, but no longer than 12 months, or not to 12 months. So between 3 to 12 months, they have not had any of the criteria with the exception of craving. Because somebody could be sober for 20 years and they may still crave that substance. Okay, so basically they're in recovery for at least 3 months. They've met none of the criteria with the exception of craving, but it's been less than 12 months. In sustained remission means that for at least 12 months, so for at least 1 year, no criteria have been met with the exception of craving. So basically they've been in recovery for at least a year. In a controlled environment means that that person is in an environment where there is restriction or less opportunity to obtain the substance. So it could be a rehabilitation facility, halfway house, or jail. Those are just some examples. When people are using opiates, you can also use the specifier on maintenance therapy, and that really means that that person is on a drug like Suboxone or methadone to help them with their recovery. So for every substance, when it comes to looking at your homework assignment or you're working with people, then you need to go through the 11 criteria for each substance. So for homework this week, you are going to read through the following cases and offer a tentative diagnosis for each person. You will also justify why you are placing this diagnosis on them, citing the DSM V criteria. So we will go through one of the cases, Jimmy. We are going to review the diagnostic criteria, and I will tell you how I would like you to write the diagnosis. So let's look at Jimmy. Again, we can only use the information that's provided. We cannot assume anything. Using case studies can be difficult, because again, if we had Jimmy in front of us, we might be able to get more information to add criteria. But again, we're only diagnosing using the criteria that we are being provided with based on the information. So Jimmy is a 16-year-old single white male. He has been smoking a significant amount of marijuana nearly every day for the past year or so. He reports that he regularly consumes between 1 to 2 grams per day. Jimmy has skipped school multiple times to get high with some friends. He recently was arrested for shoplifting a pack of cigarettes from Stewart's. At the time of his arrest, the police found a small amount of pot and a bowl on his person. This was the first formal arrest. He also acknowledged that his girlfriend gets angry with him about his drug use and just told him yesterday that she was sick of being with a burnout. The way that I recommend that you go through each one of these cases is each drug is listed. You're going to go through the 11 criteria, and we'll go through Jimmy's criteria together. For some of the cases, there are multiple substances. So when you look at, I think it's number 4, Tom, he is using both alcohol and marijuana. So I would recommend that you go through the criteria first with alcohol, like we will in a minute, with the cannabis with Jimmy, and then go through cannabis, okay? So people can have more than one substance use disorder. So the substance that Jimmy is using is marijuana, or labeled as cannabis in the DSM V. So looking at Jimmy's case, does Jimmy take marijuana in larger amounts or over a longer period of time than was intended? Again, the key word is intended. Nowhere in the case study does it say that he is smoking more than he intends to, or that he's taking larger amounts of the substance than he intends to. So he would not meet criteria number 1. Number 2, there's a persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control use. It does not say that he tries to cut down or control his use, or wants to. Number 3, there is a great deal of time spent in activities necessary to obtain the substance, use it, or recover from its effects. So again, this is tricky because if we had Jimmy in front of us, we could get a time frame. We know he's smoking 1 to 2 grams a day. We don't know how long it's taking him to use the substance, or how he's obtaining it, or how long it takes for him to recover. So if we had Jimmy in front of us, I would say that we may be able to find that information, and we probably would decide that criteria number 3 fits. However, we cannot assume. So because we don't want to give him a diagnosis that, again, is using the power of the pen, I would suggest that we hold off on number 3, that we do not use number 3 unless we have more information. Again, you can always add criteria after you find more information from people, but you don't want to assume, because that could change the severity of their diagnosis. Number 4, I also mentioned that craving was very difficult unless it's specifically stated in the case study that somebody is craving or that they can't wait to use it. You cannot use number 4. And it does not say in Jimmy's case study that he craves the substance. Number 5, recurrent use resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home. So in the case study, it says that there are multiple occasions that Jimmy is not attending school. So he is 16. His major role obligation would be to attend school and to do his schoolwork, and he is not doing that. And again, it's recurrent. It says multiple times, so we know that it's more than 1. So he meets criteria number 5. Number 6, continued use despite having persistent or recurrent social or personal problems caused or exacerbated by the effects of the substance. It does state in the case study that his girlfriend gets angry at him and actually recently said she is sick of being with a burnout. And based on that, we could say that he does meet criteria number 6, because it is he's continuing to use. He knows that he gets into arguments with his girlfriend. He knows that his girlfriend doesn't like it, and obviously it sounds like the relationship has terminated based on the information that we have. 7, important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced due to use. So because we used the school situation in number 5, we cannot double dip. And we don't have any other information to suggest that he has given up any other types of activities because of use. So we're going to use one or the other to prevent increasing or the severity of his diagnosis. So I would say no for number 7. Number 8, recurrent use in situations in which it's physically hazardous. We do not have any information suggesting that he has been in a physically hazardous situations. So we cannot use number 8. Number 9, substance use is continued despite knowledge of having persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problems that are likely to have been caused or exacerbated by the substance. We don't know his physical health and his psychological health, and it doesn't say anything in the case study that he's having any sort of problems like that. Tolerance, I would say yes. This is one that students, it's nice to have a discussion with students in regards to this. So if he's smoking 1 to 2 grams per day, so I always say that think of somebody who doesn't smoke marijuana. If they went and just smoked 2 grams on a random day, then they're not going to have a very good tolerance to that, probably. 1 to 2 grams is significant for somebody who doesn't smoke, so we can suggest that he does have tolerance. We do not know if he has any withdrawal symptoms based on the case study. So from that, we know from going through this, we can say that he meets criteria number 5, number 6, and number 10. That is 3 criteria. So if you go down to your specifiers, you can see that 2 to 3 symptoms means that he has a mild a mild cannabis use disorder, because you have to specify what the substance is. So on your homework assignment for number 1, you will write that he meets criteria number 5, 6, and 10, and then you will write cannabis use disorder, mild. So for each one of the case studies, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to read the case study, you'll go through the 11 criteria, and you will decide what criteria the people meet, and you will give them a tentative diagnosis based on the substance that they're using. Again, there are some individuals, at least one, which is Tom, who uses more than one substance. So you would have to go through alcohol first, and then cannabis. Okay, you can't. You have to separate the two in order to get a proper diagnosis for each substance. So I hope that this was helpful for you. Please reach out and let me know if you have any questions.